Sa video lesson na ito, ang pag-uusapan natin ay ang introduction sa hypothesis testing. Kasi itong hypothesis testing ay importante ito sa gagawin nating research later on. So first of all, we will define what is hypothesis. Hypothesis is an assertion or conjecture about a population parameter or parameter. It is also called statistical hypothesis. It explains what you expect to happen, clear and understandable, testable, measurable, and contain independent and dependent variables. Noong una, pinag-usapan natin yung dalawang uri ng statistics, the descriptive and the inferential statistics. Itong hypothesis testing ay gagamitin natin dito sa inferential statistics. Doon sa descriptive, hindi na. Yung mga descriptive naman, yung mga previous natin na pinag-usapan about the examples, yung measures of positions, measures of central tendencies, measures of dispersion or variation. So, yun yung mga descriptive. Dito sa inferential, medyo kakaiba. We need to interpret the result. We need to test a hypothesis. So, this is the introduction. But now, what is hypothesis? Okay, based on this definition, nung una, dinefine natin itong hypothesis bilang educated guess. So, hula. Hula lang, pero educated. Ibig sabihin, meron tayong basihan based on our observations sa mga nangyayari sa ating palibot, sa mga phenomenon. So, meron tayong parang naiisip na ito yung dahilan kung bakit nangyayari yung isang bagay. Ito yung dahilan kung bakit ito yung nangyayari. So, yung mga iniisip natin na gano'n, yung ating mga ganong conjecture or assertion, yun yung ating hypothesis. That is a proposed explanation to that phenomenon. Halimbawa, sa ating klase, gusto nating obserbahan yung ating mga estudyante based on their scores. Nakikita natin na mas matataas ang score ng ating mga students na mga babae kaysa mga lalaki. So, masasabi natin na mas magaling yung ating mga estudyante na babae. So, in that case, yan yung magiging hypothesis natin. But, we are not sure kung tama yung hypothesis natin. It is subject for testing. Kaya meron tayong tinatawag na hypothesis testing. Iti-test natin yan kung tama ba yung ating hypothesis or hindi. So that is what we call the hypothesis. Meron tayong dito mga example ng hypothesis. From our previous lesson, pinag-usapan din natin yung kaibahan ng tinatawag nating parameter at saka yung statistic. Yung statistic, yun yung mga data, characteristics na nakuha natin dun sa ating samples. And then yung parameter, ito naman yung characteristics na nakuha natin dun sa buong population. But our statistic or the data we get from the samples ay pwede natin gamitin to describe the whole population, to interpret what is happening in the whole population. Kasi nga, kung ano man yung behavior or characteristics ng ating sample, parang yun na rin yung nagre-represent sa buong population. So we have here the examples of the hypothesis. Let's check. The population of the consumers who purchase brand X of female facial wash exceeds 60%. So, yan yung ating hypothesis. But we are not sure if that is correct. That's why we need to test that hypothesis. Another one, the mean daily allowance of high school students in rural areas is at most 150. So, masasabi natin, pinakamataas na daily allowance sa mga estudyante sa mga rural areas, yung pinakamataas ay 150. Yan yung ating observation na pwede natin gawing hypothesis. And then later on, we will try to test if that hypothesis is correct or not by doing research and testing that type of hypothesis. So, ito yung mga halimbawa ng ating tinatawag na hypothesis. Okay? Now, let's go to the types of statistical hypothesis. Meron tayong dalawang uri ng statistical hypothesis. We call that statistical hypothesis dahil ginagamit natin sa statistics. One, or first type, we have the what we call the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis, denoted by H sub 0 or sub O, is a statement which states that there is no significant relationship or no significant difference between two or more variables, or one variable does not affect another variable. So from the word null, no, walang kaibahan. Walang relasyon yung dalawang variable. Halimbawa, meron bang relasyon yung height at saka weight ng isang tao? Meron o wala? Pag sinabi natin walang relasyon, yan yung ating tinatawag na null hypothesis. And then yung pangalawang uri ng hypothesis ay tinatawag nating alternative hypothesis. That is denoted by in symbol H sub A. This is the hypothesis that changes the null hypothesis. Siyempre yung kabaligtaran. Kung yung null hypothesis ay sinasabi natin walang relasyon, walang kaugnayan, hindi affected, but in alternative hypothesis, dito naman ay meron. Ito yung kabaligtaran ng null hypothesis. So, may significant difference. May significant relationship. Yung dalawang variables, pwede natin sabihin na may kaugnayan. Yun yung ating alternative hypothesis. Now, meron tayong tinatawag din na types of decision errors. Sa ating mga decision, pwede rin pala tayong magkamali sa ating decision. In statistics, we have this, what we call the decision errors also. Meaning, nag-research tayo, tinest natin yung hypothesis, tapos mali yung ating decision. When dealing with hypothesis test, there are 4 possible outcomes. The 2 outcomes lead to incorrect decision, and the other 2 lead to correct decision. The outcomes are described in the given table. Tingnan natin. Ito yung summary ng possible outcomes for a hypothesis test. So, nakita natin dito yung fact, ito yung HO, or the null hypothesis is true. And the other one, null hypothesis is false. And then we have here the decision na gagawin natin. It's either we failed to reject, meaning we accept. And then, we reject the hypothesis. Kasi pag meron kasi tayong hypothesis, dalawa lang yung pwede natin gawin dyan. It's either we reject the hypothesis or we accept the hypothesis. Pero mali yung tinatawag natin na accept. Term natin dyan dapat failed to reject. Kasi nga, the main purpose of testing the hypothesis is to reject the null hypothesis. Yun yung ating main purpose. I-reject natin yung null hypothesis. I-reject natin yung hypothesis na walang relasyon yan, walang kaugnayan yan. Yun ang ating i-reject. Pag hindi natin nagawa yan, then we failed to reject the null hypothesis. Ito. Parang ibig sabihin lang din na tinanggap natin yung null hypothesis. But we are not directly saying that. Ang sasabihin lang natin, we failed to reject. Kasi nga, ang purpose natin is to reject. Pero hindi natin nagawang i-reject. Failure tayo doon. Now, ito yung ating dalawang decision na gagawin. And, halimbawa, if null hypothesis is true, dapat ang correct nating decision dyan ay failed to reject. Hindi natin i-reject yung null hypothesis kasi nga true siya. In short, wala tayong magagawa, kailangan nating tanggapin yung null hypothesis. Kasi totoo yun. Pero pag ni-reject natin yung null hypothesis, which is true, yun, magkakaroon tayo ng tinatawag na type 1 error. Yun yung type 1 error. Again, type 1 error. Pag ni-reject natin yung null hypothesis na totoo, tama naman siya. So, yun, type 1 error ang makukumit natin dyan. And the other one, kapag yung null hypothesis ay false, o kung hindi talaga siya totoo, tapos ni-reject natin, yun ang tamang decision. Null hypothesis is false, dapat i-reject natin yan kasi false yan. Ngayon, kapag hindi natin ni-reject yung null hypothesis na false, meaning pag tinanggap natin yung null hypothesis kahit na false siya, ayun, doon tayo magkakaroon ng type 2 error. Yun yung Kaibahan. Type 2 error kapag tinanggap natin yung maling hypothesis. Null hypothesis rather. Type 1 error kapag ni-reject natin yung tamang null hypothesis. Ito yon, okay? Now, itong type 1 error ay tinatawag din nating alpha. And then yung type 2 error naman, tinatawag din nating beta or beta error. Yan. Now, ano naman itong tinatawag nating level of significance? When a researcher tests the hypothesis, he is not certain that the decision is 100% correct. O, tama naman talaga yon. Pag nagtetest tayo ng hypothesis, talagang hindi tayo sigurado kung tama yung ating decision. Kung talaga bang 100% na correct. However, he is confident at a certain level that the decision is correct. Pero yun, confident tayo na decision natin ay correct sa certain level, hindi 100% exactly. Maybe nandun sa 99, pwedeng 95, pwedeng 90. Yun yung magiging ating confident level. Certain tayo dun na pwede tayong magkamali, konti lang. So, kapag ganun sa class, halimbawa 99% na sure tayo na tama ang decision natin, meaning meron tayong 1% na error. So, yan yung tinatawag nating level of significance. Yung 1% na yon, that is now the level of significance. Kapag confident tayo na 95% tama yung ating decision, ibig sabihin nun, yung level of significance is 5%. Meaning 5% yung chance na makakommit tayo ng error dun sa ating decision. Kapag 90% naman yung ating confidence level, ang magiging level of significance natin ay 10%. Level of significance. Ito yung chance na pwede tayo magkamali sa ating decision. Level of significance is the probability of committing a type 1 error or the alpha error or the probability of rejecting the correct null hypothesis. Kasi nga sa una pa lang, yun yung ating main target talaga. Pag meron tayong null hypothesis, ang gusto nating gawin ay i-reject yung null hypothesis na yan kasi nga hindi totoo. Kasi para sa atin, may kaugnayan yung dalawang variable or more, yung dalawang bagay na gusto nating i-research. So, yun, dapat ma-reject natin yung null hypothesis. Kapag ginawa natin yun, ni-reject natin talaga siya kahit na tama yung null hypothesis, yun yung ating type 1 error na iniiwasan natin. Kaya itong level of confidence, yan yung probability na mag-commit tayo ng type 1 error. Usually hanggang 10% lang yan. Most commonly, 5% lang dapat. More than that, medyo hindi na masyadong maganda yung resulta ng ating magiging decision or research. Now, what is this power of a test? Power of a test is the probability of not committing a type 2 error or beta error. Yan naman yung power of a test. Okay, compare natin sa una, itong level of significance, the probability of committing type 1 error or alpha. Ito, the probability of not committing type 2 error or beta, the power of a test. And then meron tayong tinatawag na test statistics. The test statistics is a mathematical formula that allows researchers to determine the likelihood of obtaining sample outcomes if the null hypothesis were true. The value of the test statistics is used to make a decision regarding the null hypothesis. The test statistics is used as a basis for deciding whether to reject or accept the null hypothesis. The rejection lies on either the left or right tail of a normal curve of one-tailed test is being used. So sa test statistics, meron tayong tinatawag na normal curve. Okay, ito siya, the normal curve. So, kapag nasa gitna, banda yung ating value, so ito yung mga tinatawag nating non-rejection region. If the result is beyond this, ito na yung tinatawag nating rejection region. Kapag one tail, ganito yung itsura, yung ating rejection region ay nandito sa right side ng ating normal curve. Pag dito na nabilong yung value na nakuha natin, value of the x or whatever it is, yun na, we have to reject the null hypothesis. Kapag dito sa gitna, we have to accept the null hypothesis. So later on, malalaman natin kung paano ito ginagawa. That is for rejection and non-rejection region. So what is this? The rejection region, when the test statistics lie on the rejection region, then the null hypothesis will be rejected. Kapag doon naman sa non-rejection region, then we have to accept the null hypothesis. Critical value. The critical value is a value that separates the non-rejection region and the rejection region. Of course, kung balikan natin ito, this is the one tail. So ito yung ating critical value. Itong boundary between the non-rejection region and the rejection region. Ito, this one. So ito yung ating critical value. Parang boundary siya. One-tailed and two-tailed test. If the alpha or the significance level is 0.05, the area at both end tail is 0.025 kasi nga hinati sa dalawa or dinivide sa 2 yung 0.05. In one-tailed test, the rejection region lies either at the left or right end tail of the normal curve. So, dalawa. Kapag two-tailed, ito yung magiging value ng ating alpha, 0.025, both ends of the normal curve. And then kapag one tail lang, ito 0.05, it's either on the right or on the left. This one. So usually we are using for the normal curve, we are using z. For the standard normal distribution, ito yung ating critical value here. Z equals 1.645. Beyond this value, we are going to reject the null hypothesis. Below this value, we are going to accept or we fail to reject the null hypothesis. That is for one-tailed. Ito yung two-tailed natin. So, dalawa. Both sides of the normal curve ang rejection region. So, beyond this and this, yan na yung ating rejection. So, pag dyan nag-fall yung ating value, i-reject natin yung null hypothesis. Kapag sa gitna, we don't have a choice but to accept. Para sa ating z-test, ito na yung ating mga values. For one-tailed test, we have the left tail and the right tail. And we have here the last column for the two-tailed test, type of test. Then we have the level of significance, tatlo ito usually. 0.05 or 5%, 0.01 or 1%, and 0.10 for 10%. So ito yung mga critical values para sa value ng z. Okay, this one. Reject null hypothesis if z is less than or equal to negative 1.645 or if z is greater than or equal to 1.645. Ito negative. So, less than this negative value or greater than the positive of it, we reject the null hypothesis. Kapag naman sa two-tailed, ito ang value. Z equals greater than or equal to 1.96 or z is equal to less than or equal to 1.96 para sa 5% level of significance. For 1%, ito yung value natin. Z is less than or equal to negative 2.33 and z is greater than or equal to positive 2.33. Kapag naman sa two-tailed, it should be z is greater than or equal to 2.575 or less than or equal to negative 2.575. For the 10%, ito naman yung magiging value niya. So later on, malalaman natin kung paano ito gamitin kapag na-solve na natin yung ating z value. It's either we reject our null hypothesis or we accept the null hypothesis. Now, so that's all about the introduction for the hypothesis testing. Okay, so now let's go to the Lesson 2, Definition of Hypothesis Testing. Kanina, hypothesis lang yun. Now, we will go to the definition of hypothesis testing. To determine whether to accept or reject the null hypothesis based on the sample data, a statistician usually follows a certain process. This process is known as hypothesis testing. So, parang gumagawa tayo ng scientific method para masabi natin kung kailangan ba natin i-accept or i-reject yung tinatawag nating null hypothesis. This is a type of statistical inference which examines the claim about a population based on the information obtained in the random sample. So now we have here a different steps kung paano gawin yung hypothesis testing. Okay, number 1, state the hypothesis. So dalawa yung ating magiging hypothesis dito. Yung una, yung null hypothesis. Sasabihin natin na walang kaugnayan, yung dalawang variable, walang relasyon, walang difference, yung dalawang variable. And then, ang ating alternative hypothesis, yung kabaliktaran nun, na merong kaugnayan, may relasyon, may kaibahan. Yan yung ating step 1, state the hypothesis. Number 2, set the criteria for a decision. So, gagamitin natin yung mga value kanina, yung value ng z. If z is like that, we will reject the null hypothesis or we will accept the null hypothesis based dun sa table kanina. So, babalikan natin yon for the criteria or criterion. For that number 3, compute the test statistics. So, whatever it is, marami tayong ginagamit na test statistics. Kung ano man ito, we will compute that for step 3. Parang dito lalabas yung ating solution for the computation of the test statistics. And then for the step 4, we will make decision based on our result in step 3. So kung ano yung magiging resulta, i-interpret natin yan and we will make decision. So ang ating decision, it's either we reject the null hypothesis or we accept the null hypothesis. And then later on, meron tayong tinatawag na p-value. This p-value, makakatulong din sa atin if we reject or accept the null hypothesis. So in our next lessons, we will discuss this in details. This time, ano pa lang itong gagawin natin? Introduction.